Have you ever seen a doll possessed with the life of a human, committing crimes like a cold-blooded killer, acting with the ferocity of a wild beast, and feeding like a ravenous zombie? Unfortunately, I came face to face with such a nightmare. If you want to know why this doll was alive and how it became a murderer, I suggest you don't miss this bone-chilling story. My name is Matthew. I am 65 years old, and I spent 30 of those years wearing the coarse, heavy uniform of a police officer. When I retired, I thought I had seen the worst things a human being could witness, from abandoned corpses in gutters to the glassed-over eyes of killers who knew no mercy. But life had cooked up a much filthier game for me. To ensure I wouldn't have to beg for a living at this age, I accepted a job as a night security guard at a massive shopping mall on the outskirts of the city. A place that is filled with the screams and laughter of children by day, but at night, it turns into a gargantuan, silent prison where even the sound of your own footsteps is terrifying. But before I tell you about that cursed night, let me take you back to the end of my service in the police force. We had a case that had stolen the sleep from all our eyes. The case of a psychopath named Joseph. The man was a born killer, but he had a strange habit that turned one's stomach. Always and everywhere, he carried a tattered, filthy doll with him. They said he talked to it, set out food for it, and even positioned the doll during his crimes as if it were watching. One rainy night, during a breathtaking chase, I cornered him in a dead-end alley that reeked of urine and dampness. Joseph drew his gun, and I, following my 30-year instinct, fired first. The bullet landed dead center in his chest. As he was dying, that same ugly doll was in his arms. I stood over him, watching him, when suddenly a massive, warm clot of blood erupted from his mouth. I saw it with my own eyes, that thick, black blood, as if gravity worked differently for it, poured directly into the open mouth of that plastic doll. In that moment, I only thought of how repulsive it was. I didn't know I was witnessing the migration of a filthy soul into a new vessel. Now, back to the present. In the mall where I work, the management had started a new section for secondhand dolls. The idea was for people to bring in their old dolls so that poor families could buy gifts for their children at a very low price. The shelves were full of eyeless bears and faded cars. The first night I started my patrol, I passed by that booth. Hundreds of pairs of glass eyes were staring at me. But suddenly, I froze. Among all those dolls, I saw a familiar face. It was Joseph's doll, with the same crooked smirk and the same dried bloodstains that had now turned brown. It sat among the others as if it had always been there. A shiver ran down my spine. I told myself, Matthew, you're getting old. Your memories are blurring with reality. But that night was only the beginning of that plastic demon's awakening. The silence of the mall was so heavy it felt as if the concrete walls themselves were breathing. It was past 2 a.m. I was sitting in the monitoring room, struggling with a cup of cold, bitter coffee just to stay awake. My eyes were glued to the monitors, lifeless, black and white images showing empty hallways. Suddenly, on monitor number 9, right where the second-hand doll booth was located, a shadow flickered. At first, I thought it might be a rat or a cat, but the shadow was taller. It looked like something was moving between the shelves. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and set out. Every step I took on the polished floor stones echoed through that hollow space like a gunshot. When I reached the booth, I swept my light across the shelves. Everything appeared orderly at first glance, but a strange smell was lingering in the air. The scent of cheap tobacco and stale blood, the exact same smell that used to waft from Joseph's clothes in the interrogation room. I aimed the beam at that cursed doll. It had changed positions. Before, it was on the second row, but now it had moved to the very edge of the shelf, as if it were about to jump down. I tried to tell myself that perhaps a tremor or the settling of the building had caused it to move, but deep down, I knew I was fooling myself. I turned to head toward the escalator when a thunderous sound erupted behind me. It sounded as if someone had slammed a sack full of stones onto the floor with all their might. I spun around instantly. The entire shelf of dolls had been overturned. Hundreds of plastic and plush dolls were scattered across the floor, but that filthy doll, it was standing right in the middle of the hallway, perfectly upright on its two tiny feet. It stared at me as if it were measuring the weight of my fear. My hand trembled, and the flashlight beam danced across its face. That crooked smirk was no longer just a simple line. It seemed the corners of its mouth had pulled back further, revealing a row of tiny, yellowed teeth protruding from the plastic. I was still in shock when I felt something slide along the wall behind me. I jerked the light toward the white wall at my back. My heart sank. Written in a thick, dark liquid that was still dripping were the words, "Matthew, remember how I used to beg? Now it's your turn to shiver like a dog." It was blood. The warm, metallic scent of fresh blood choked my airway. I was alone. The mall was locked. No one but me was here. So where did this blood come from? A strange trembling took over my knees. I remembered that rainy night. I remembered Joseph's blood-masked face. Suddenly, a scuttling sound came from the floor. The doll was gone. It had vanished into the darkness between the shadows. Only the sound of its plastic feet hitting the stones remained. Tap, tap, tap. A sound that grew closer with every passing second, and I had no idea from which direction this little demon was about to strike. That damned tap-tap echoed through the empty corridors as if 1,000 of those creatures were circling me at once. My flashlight began to flicker, as if even the light was terrified of what was taking shape in the dark. I, a man who had spent 30 years facing off against thugs and smugglers, was now losing my mind like a 5-year-old child. I yelled, "Whoever you are, come out. You think these cheap tricks can scare Matthew." But only the echo of my own trembling voice answered me. As I backed away, my foot caught on something, and I slammed face first onto the floor. The flashlight flew from my hand, skidding several meters away, its beam landing on a row of male mannequins. As I scrambled to get up, I saw a new sentence added to the wall beside the mannequins in that same warm, fresh blood. "Joseph never dies alone, Matthew." That doll was just a vessel, and now I'm inside it. I remember Joseph always saying this doll was the keeper of his secrets. Now it seemed those secrets had manifested into a real monster. Suddenly, I felt something shift in the suspended ceiling above me. The moment I looked up, one of the ceiling tiles fell, and that filthy doll landed on my shoulder like a thrown piece of raw meat. Its weight was far greater than any plastic doll. It felt as if a heavy stone had dropped onto my back. I screamed and tried to tear it off me with my hands, but the savage creature clawed into my hair with its small, powerful grips. The stench of its breath, a foul mixture of a corpse and gasoline, made my stomach turn. Before I could react, I felt something sharp and piercing, like a dagger, sink into my calf. The doll, with metal teeth now fully protruding from its plastic lips, bit down into my leg. The pain felt as though a piece of my being was being ripped out with pliers. I hammered my fist into the doll's torso, but it was like striking a tree trunk. Finally, with every ounce of effort, I pried it off and hurled it toward the glass display case opposite me. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, but the doll landed on its feet like a cat. In its mouth was a piece of my trouser fabric and my own flesh. It began to chew calmly, my blood dripping from the corners of its filthy lips. That thing was actually eating me. Matthew the cop had become prey for a demon-possessed toy. The pain in my leg was as if a red-hot skewer had been thrust through to the bone. Warm blood flowed freely, making the spaces between my toes sticky. That vile creature, that cursed piece of plastic, was chewing a piece of my body right before my eyes. The crunch-crunch of its teeth in that deadly silence sounded like a chicken bone being crushed. With every chew, it tilted its head and stared at me with those soulless glass eyes, as if it were savoring the taste of my blood. I struggled to pull myself up and leaned against the wall. I started heading toward the medical supplies section. I had to stop the bleeding somehow, or I would pass out before he could finish me off. But with every step I took, my bloody footprint remained on the white stones of the floor, a precise map for that little hunter trailing me in the shadows. When I reached the first aid section, my hands were shaking so hard that I couldn't open the cabinet door. Suddenly, a faint giggle came from the air conditioning duct above my head. Joseph Stahl, with that raspy and sickening voice, said, "Where to in such a hurry, Matthew? We've only just finished the appetizer. You know, Joseph always said the meat of a fearful man is salty, but you smell like regret." He vanished again. I quickly grabbed a bandage and wrapped it around my leg. As I was tightening the dressing, I noticed that all the advertising monitors in the hallway turned on simultaneously. On every screen was Joseph's photo, the same mugshot we had taken at the precinct. But there was a difference. In the photo, Joseph was pointing at me and his mouth was moving. It was as if hundreds of digital Josephs were chanting together, "Revenge, revenge." I turned to flee, but suddenly I saw that the exit hallway was blocked by a mountain of chairs and tables from the food court, piled up in a bizarre fashion. How had that 12-inch creature moved all those things? How much power did a spirit actually have? Fear weighed on my chest like a nightmare. I felt something clawing at my hair from behind. Before I could turn around, the doll leapt onto my shoulder. It dug its sharp claws into my skin and brought its mouth close to my left ear. I felt its cold, putrid breath. With a sudden, lightning-fast movement, it locked its teeth around my ear. I heard the sound of cartilage tearing inside my head. My scream shook every floor of the mall. That plastic murderer was butchering me piece by piece. The pain of my ear being ripped off echoed in my head so intensely that for a few seconds, everything went white. It felt like my brain was burning inside my skull. With all my strength, I reached for my shoulder, grabbed that filthy creature, and threw it with savage force. The doll landed several meters away on the floor, along with my ear. I pressed my hand against the empty space where my ear had been. Blood spurted like a fountain from between my fingers. The world was spinning around my head, and the scent of iron and blood filled everything. That plastic demon stood on its 2 feet, still clutching the piece of my ear between its yellowed teeth. Its plastic face was now completely painted with my blood. It began to swallow with relish, speaking in Joseph's raspy voice. "Do you see, Matthew? The taste of revenge is much sweeter than I imagined. That night you shot me, my blood was cold, but your flesh still pulses. It's still warm." With my brain barely functioning due to the pain and blood loss, I leaned against the wall, limping heavily. I had to find a way to escape. I remembered that the mall was equipped with a manual emergency alarm system connected directly to the police station. If I could reach that button, I might have a chance at survival. But every time I tried to take a step, the doll would cut me off, darting through the shadows in a rapid, zigzagging motion. He didn't want to kill me quickly. He wanted to torture me to death. He wanted me to feel the fear down to the marrow of my bones. Everywhere I went, he had written for me on the glass of the display windows with fresh blood. "Where are you going, brave policeman? Your hands and feet are still left. I haven't tasted your eyes yet." I felt as if I were trapped in a never-ending nightmare. I headed toward the security office, where the alarm button was located. When I arrived, my hand trembling violently, I reached for the glass casing of the button. But just as I went to smash the glass, I saw the wires behind the device had been completely gnawed through, severed at the roots. Joseph's doll was perched atop the filing cabinet, playing with a piece of copper wire. He looked at me with a diabolical smile and said, "Did you think I'd let anyone ruin our beautiful game? We've only just reached the good parts, Matthew. Come give me another piece of your body as a gift." I drew my weapon and aimed it at him, but with a swift leap, he jumped through the security room window and vanished into the darkness of the main hall. I was left alone with a mutilated, bleeding body in a mall that had now become Joseph's private slaughterhouse. My hands shook so much that the magazine of the gun rattled. The blood on the side of my head had dried, tightening my skin, but the pain in my calf throbbed with every heartbeat. The security room, once my sanctuary, now smelled like a trap. I looked out through the shattered glass of the room into the main hall. The mall was submerged in silence. But this was not the silence of peace. It was the silence that reigns before the executioner's axe falls. I limped out of the room, clutching the gun with both hands. Every shadow that fell across the floor made me think it was that plastic monster. Suddenly, I heard the sound of something dragging across the hall's stones. The dim light of the red emergency lamps cast long, distorted shadows on the walls. I spun toward the noise. I saw that all the mannequins from the clothing department had been pulled out of their display windows and lined up in the middle of the hallway. Every single one of them was turned toward me, as if a lifeless army were awaiting their commander's order. On the chest of one mannequin, written in large, bloody letters, were the words, "Matthew, are you tired?" Joseph never got tired. Suddenly, the doll's laughter erupted from inside the torso of one of the mannequins. I fired in a rage. The explosion of the gunshot sounded like a bomb in the enclosed space. The mannequin shattered into pieces, but the doll wasn't inside. He was playing with my mind. He wanted me to waste all my bullets on shadows. As I backed away, I felt the floor become slick beneath my feet. I looked down. It was a trail of my own blood, spilled in a perfect circle around me. The doll suddenly emerged from behind one of the pillars. This time, he wasn't running. He walked slowly and with confidence. He looked at me as if he were certain my time was up. In that raspy voice, he said, "You know, Matthew, Joseph always said policemen are like guard dogs, loyal but stupid. Did you think you could kill a soul that has been fed on malice for years with a single bullet?" The filthy creature began to approach. I aimed again, but he suddenly stopped and changed his tone. He spoke as if he were truly exhausted. He said, "Enough. I'm tired of this hide-and-seek too. Do you want to end this? I don't want to eat your flesh anymore. Joseph's soul is too heavy. This small body is bursting. His true spirit has moved into that large cutout of Joseph at the end of the hall. If you destroy that standee, I'll be free and everything will end. Go, Matthew, go and finish it." My eyes were blurring from weakness, but a glimmer of hope sparked in my heart. I thought maybe this really was the way out. I moved toward the end of the hallway, where the large cutout of Joseph stood in the darkness, unaware that this was the final sinister plot of that little murderer for my total destruction. With every step I took toward the end of the corridor, it felt as if I were sinking into a swamp. The air was so heavy that oxygen couldn't reach my lungs. I had lost a lot of blood and my body had turned cold, but the doll's words were like a lifeline I was desperate to grab. I thought to myself that if I shot that cutout, Joseph's soul would be released and this nightmare would end. Naive Matthew. How foolish I was to think that the devil could ever get tired. I reached the end of the corridor. There, right at the edge of the mall's newly renovated section, stood the life-sized cutout of Joseph. Its dimensions were exactly those of a real human. It wore the same cream-colored overcoat he had on the night he died, and the same brimmed hat that cast a deep shadow over its face. In that faint red light, the cutout looked as if it were actually breathing. The small doll sat a few meters away on the edge of a cabinet, watching me with its glinting glass eyes. In a tone that was no longer savage, but sounded more like a seductive whisper, it said, "Shoot, Matthew. Aim for the heart. Empty all your hatred into that plastic heart so we can both be at peace." I raised my gun. My hands were shaking so violently that the barrel traced circles in the air. I gripped my wrist with my other hand to steady the tremors. Every memory of that rainy night, every ounce of pain from my severed ear, and all the terror I had endured over these past few hours paraded before my eyes. I pressed my finger against the trigger. I felt as if this were the final bullet of my life. Just before I fired, a strange scent hit my nose. It wasn't gasoline. It was the sharp smell of gunpowder and chemicals leaking from the seams beneath the cutout's clothes. But it was already too late. My nerves had already issued the command to my finger. The roar of the gunshot echoed through the hallway. The bullet landed dead center in the cutout's chest, right where the heart should be. But instead of the sound of shattering plaster, a sharp, metallic click rang out. Tick. At that exact moment, the little doll, which had been calm until then, erupted into a loud, manic laugh. It laughed so hard it seemed every plastic cell in its body was vibrating with joy. It screamed, "You old fool. You always shoot first and think later. Joseph never lied to you. He always said he'd take you to hell with him." In that fraction of a second, I saw the cutout's clothing burst open, revealing neat rows of dynamite instead of cotton and plastic, the detonators activated by the impact of my own bullet. The blue light of the primer flashed through the entire corridor for a millisecond, and then everything turned a searing, vivid red. In that moment, time stood still for me. I looked into the doll's eyes. It was no longer that wild, terrifying creature. It was as if Joseph himself were laughing at my stupidity from behind that plastic mask. I realized that all those games, the flesh-eating, and the cat-and-mouse chase were only meant to bring me to this very spot. He wanted me to sign my own death warrant with my own hands. The explosion felt as if the ground beneath my feet had opened its maw. The thunderous roar that followed was beyond human hearing. My eardrums ruptured instantly, followed by nothing but a long, continuous whistle ringing in my head. The blast wave lifted my body like a scrap of paper and hurled me backward. I felt the bones in my body crushing under the atmospheric pressure. The concrete ceiling of the mall's new section collapsed like layers of biscuits, and massive tongues of fire swallowed the darkness of the night. In that state of suspension between earth and sky, amidst the smoke and fire, I saw the doll one last time. It was burning in the flames, yet its small hands were stretched out toward me, as if it intended to never let go of my collar, even in the next world. Its plastic face was melting, hot black droplets dripping onto the floor, but that crooked smirk remained until the very last moment. When my body finally hit the ground, I felt no more pain. There was only a strange coldness creeping up from my feet. I looked up at the black sky visible through the jagged hole in the mall's roof. How distant and indifferent the stars seemed. The thick smoke from burning plastic and gasoline completely blocked my airway. My eyelids grew heavy. The last image I saw was the flames closing in on my face and the shadow of a man in a brimmed hat standing amidst the fire, waving goodbye to me. The following morning, the newspapers ran the headline: "Disaster at the shopping mall. Gas leak kills duty-bound security guard." For days, firefighters searched through the piles of iron and concrete. They found my charred body, but there was something they never wrote in the official reports. Between the fingers of my left hand, the forensic pathologist found a tiny fragment of a glass doll that had remained miraculously intact. A new mall was built, shinier and larger than the old one. But the new guards say that on certain nights, when the floors are completely empty, a faint giggling sound echoes from the ventilation ducts. They say that sometimes they spot a tattered, scorched doll sitting behind the display windows, smiling at passersby. I, Matthew, am gone, but Joseph always finds a way to stay. Be careful with old toys. They might be hungrier for revenge than you could ever imagine.
All the stories I share on my channel are written by me, and unlike other YouTube channels, they are not copied. So I would appreciate it if you like the video and subscribe to my channel to motivate me to write new stories.